Okay, well, welcome to session 3. Today we are going to pick up a bit where we left off last time and speak about the gene environment interactions and what happens around there. We can have a bit of a discussion because the last question in your assignment is based on that. So I thought this would be a good productive space to have a chat about that. And then we'll move on to a little bit of learning unit 3. So we'll chat about the prenatal, perinatal, neonatal development a bit. And yeah, as usual, questions. Okay, are there any, how is it going? Are there any issues? How is the assignment going? Imagine that some of you may have started that by now. Any feedback to note in terms of admin, housekeeping, anything? Can everyone now see the ICE tasks? They were being evasive. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome, great. Okay, yeah, so there are only 4 for now. I'm going to add another 2 in this coming week. I just am kind of finalizing. Okay. But yeah, obviously I don't want to say like compulsory, but I mean, it kind of is. Like the 4 that you need to do are up there already. Okay. Alrighty. So where we picked up from last time, we're pretty much bringing in this idea of nature versus nurture, but kind of settling on the idea that very much it is nature and nurture. And that's really what's behind the debate, is the interaction between them two. And hopefully you guys remember a little bit, we started the kind of complex and difficult language around the genes and the biology side of this. We will be moving away slightly from that now in the next learning unit. So yeah, it's okay. But very much just going to chat about now this interaction. So remember, we have our genes that are encoded in us when we are born. There's absolutely nothing we can do about it. It's by pure chance and obviously genetic coding that we come out the way we do. And then also, though, the way that you are born, where you're born, the way you're raised, where you're raised, all of those circumstances, your physical environment, your emotional environment, your psychological environment, all of it, all actually plays a role in your development. Okay. And very much, and that interaction has an effect on your phenotype. So very much how you display these genes. Could be physical, could be kind of behavioral. Okay. So yeah, this little complex diagram is actually quite cool with just explaining these 3 different kind of things that happen when we talk about this interaction. So firstly, at the bottom here, you'll see we've got gene environment interaction. And so like this is what your question on the assignment is about. This is also what when we say gene environment interaction, we're also speaking broadly about just this relationship between genetic factors and environmental factors, and then how those can each have an impact on whatever thing you're looking at the moment, right? So this example just is using depression or a depressive state as an example. So let's break it down a little bit. So when it comes to genetic factors, can anyone maybe think of a couple of genetic factors that there may be that we can be aware of when it comes to mental health, psychological, I mean depression specifically, but anything else as well? Trauma. Okay, interesting, because there is a field of like epigenetics that investigates how trauma can have an effect on one's genes down the like lineage. So yes, possibly. But yeah, like genetic factors. So some people are predisposed to certain psychological disorders. We haven't necessarily actually labeled all of the genes. We don't necessarily know how to find all of them, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest that some people are more genetically predisposed to things like depression, anxiety. ADHD is hereditary a lot of the time, autism, things like that. But yeah, so, and then when we talk about especially something like depression, and from where you've come so far in your psychological journey, you very much think about this as an environmental, problem, that our social and physical environments has quite a lot to do with depression and developing depression. Okay, so yeah, when it comes to environmental factors, let's talk about that in more detail. So, I mean, the little images help, but like what kind of environmental factors would we be talking about when we are trying to find out what's involved with someone developing depression? So trauma could definitely be one. That is also an environmental factor. Chronic illnesses, that's a good suggestion. That actually can be an environmental factor. Like if you or your family member suffers from chronic illness, that, depending on the level of that, can influence depression. Yeah, hormones, neurological factors would be genetic factors. Good job on that one. Sorry, bouncing back a bit. Yes, socialization, absolutely. Socialization plays a role in this. We'll unpack that a little bit further when we go into the next learning unit, actually, when it comes to socialization. Domestic violence, yep, any kind of violence, abuse, neglect, isolation, chronic pain or autoimmune issues. Actually, there's a high correlation between people suffering from autoimmune diseases and depression, because a lot of the time it goes undiagnosed. Financial loss, yes. I think we can put that under the trauma category as well. Yeah, good job. So you can see already that there are so many more environmental factors that we know about, and even just from a general knowledge perspective, know about when thinking about this topic. So you can imagine how any number of these can interact in different ways and then have this association linked to the disorder that we're talking about, so depression. Okay. And yeah, so when we speak about the gene environment interaction, it's how both of these factors, so genetic factors along with environmental factors, may interact to result in a particular, state or being or disorder or something. And then if you're just speaking about an association, that would be when you're speaking about them independently. You could say, well, there's a lot of environmental association between, let's say, people who suffered a loss in their family, so they're going through grief and then developing depression as a disorder, that kind of thing. But yeah, what you guys are focused on, especially for that question in the assignments, is very much this interaction between the two things. And always bearing in mind that it's always more complicated than just one on either side. There's very likely, maybe, there's one genetic factor that you could be like thinking of or reading about, and then there could be any number of environmental factors that are contributing to that interaction. Because if you think about it, this also it's about the complexity of our lives, right? I don't know if anyone's familiar with the term intersectionality. You may come across that at some point. But basically the idea that we all embody different identities within ourselves and we play different roles, okay? So, you can be a middle-class person, but you can be, I don't know, like uneducated for some reason, or any different roles that come into it. You could then be physically ill or have some kind of disability, that all are factors that contribute toward one's environmental association to something going wrong, or just the way that something is expressed. So depression is often just a good example for this kind of thing, because we know, and there is very much research to back up that this interaction exists. There's endless research, particularly in the field of neuropsychology. I don't know if anyone is interested in that, but you can go down that rabbit hole for quite some time, looking for and a huge field of neuropsychology is focusing on these gene environment interactions and how they play a role in one's development and, society as a whole sometimes as well. Cool. Yeah, how are we feeling about this as a topic? Those of you who have started the assignment, like, have you found any interesting readings about this? What do we understand from this idea of gene-environment interaction? Anyone maybe have another example they'd like to share? Would like to make this a bit more interactive? Yeah, Nicoletta, please go ahead. If you're trying to speak, I can't hear you. Okay, no stress. You can type as well if you can't get your mic to work, but anyone else maybe in the meanwhile? What comes to mind when someone says to you, you know, what is this phenomenon of gene-environment interactions? Could maybe you see how this may happen in your own lives? For example, when it comes to a lot of medical problems, like males are more predisposed to some things than females are, right? So, like, men in general are more predisposed to heart conditions later in life. And then we know that there are many environmental factors that come into play with that as well: diet, exercise, yeah, other genetic factors, family history, that kind of thing, stress levels. So, yeah, there's all that interaction that happens there. Yeah, excellent point to bring up, actually. We can also chat about that. So, like, how do different cultural groups deal with this interaction as well? That plays a huge role in how this plays out. Oh, Kayla, which book is that? I've got a couple of his. But yeah, he definitely, Gabor Mate, I actually don't know how to say his name, apologies for that. But yeah, he definitely speaks a lot about this a lot of the time. Excellent author, if anyone wants to go and read some very interesting nonfiction. Avantika, yes, absolutely. This can apply to anxiety very easily. So there may be some sort of genetic factor at play. I know there has been a fair amount of research into, you know, also because people are obsessed with biological sex differences, like to see, you know, who's more predisposed to anxiety and who's not, and things like that. But I'm not sure there's a solid answer on that one. But yeah, there may be other factors, and then more so the environmental factors that come into play with that is, you know, what you know, are you a student at the time? That can increase anxiety. What is the home situation like? Do you have a support system? Yeah, all of those kinds of things, those environmental factors. Yeah, a lot of talk, Rebecca, about heart conditions being genetic, but apparently now seen as epigenetic. Yeah, so I mean, epigenetics, I don't know if anyone's maybe unfamiliar with that. It's the idea that these environmental factors can over time like evolve or change genes. And yeah, it's very much based on that kind of the idea of evolution that we touched on in the first session. Um, yeah, so it's interesting and very much, you know, you'll actually read quite a lot about, especially heart conditions. It's often spoken about as a symptom of the modern lifestyle. You know, humans are now very sedentary, very stressed, eat horrifically, you know, super processed food, things like that. Our environment is all polluted and messed up. So, yeah, at what point has this actually started to change our genetic code? Neuroscientists and medical people have answers. Kaylin, that's a good question. So, in overall, just anything negative that affects you in your life that causes such things. So, I mean, not necessarily everything, right? Like, and this is where the interaction between the factors comes into it. And there are all sorts of other factors, like your resilience as a human, what coping mechanisms do you have? Like, how old are you also? Like, obviously, children are more susceptible to um, like psychological factors around bullying, abuse. That's why bullying is so tragic, because children don't really have the coping mechanisms yet if they're very young to cope with it. So it causes a lot of psychological trauma, which, yes, very much then leads to something like this. But yeah, I guess the short answer is not every negative thing will lead to something. But there's a lot of the time there will be some kind of argument, from that. Have we become weaker, do you think? Oh, well, that's a debate and a half, don't you think? I mean, physically, yeah, probably. Not everyone. I think that kind of thing evolutionarily is very contextually dependent. And what do we define as weak or strong? Yeah, interesting. That's an interesting bit of thought. Genetics, yeah, I don't know. Look, and it's also that question of what came first, chicken or the egg? Are we discovering so many more genetic disorders now, or is it just that the population is much larger and we have the technology to find these things out? It's not necessarily that there's more genetic problems now, it's just that we know more about it. But yeah, interesting question. Yeah, very much depends on who you are as a person. And yeah, so that has a lot to do with that, a lot of those genetic factors. Something also which you're going to cover in Unit 3 is like temperament with children. So you're born with a particular temperament, and it is believed that that remains stable throughout your life, and it means different things for your socialization and attachment and things like that, in particular in the early years. And then that leads to whatever effects down the road. Like, if you imagine, your personality also plays a large role. If you're someone that's very combative, closed off, not open to change, not open to risk taking, things like that, it will have an effect on how you cope with different environmental factors, different challenges. Because it came across studies related to generational trauma. Yeah, look, there's actually a lot of very interesting research on that, particularly in South Africa, because we do have so much generational trauma, and that there's actually quite a large body of literature on that is very interesting. You guys do want to go ahead and read that. It would probably be pretty useful for this essay, actually, maybe as an example. Yes, and then yeah, Nicoletta, that's really important to remember as well. Environmental elements can have that positive role in combating genetic factors. Just because you have a genetic predisposition to something doesn't mean that it will be inevitably expressed. And there's an interesting example of this that you always learn about in psychopathology, is that so everyone's always afraid of schizophrenia, because that is hereditary generally, and it could also be random. But I don't know how old everyone is here, but generally, so the age of onset for schizophrenia is usually between like 21 and 27, kind of. And so, I mean, as if early adulthood wasn't stressful enough, like you're kind of always worried about that, right? And so, a lot of research has been done into how substance abuse, and particularly marijuana, which is interesting, has literally a direct correlation in activating that schizophrenia gene. And yeah, like literally making it come about when, inducing that psychosis when it may not have before, which I find extraordinarily scary, especially, obviously given general behavior of people in that age group and the recreational substances they like to enjoy. But it is what it is. And you don't know also, if you don't know your family history for whatever reason, maybe, or if you're just one of the unlucky random genetic occurrences where you have this underlying genetic factor, it can come out and it cannot. So it is an example of how things like that can affect that. But then again, it's the same in reverse. The other side of the coin is that if you have really amazing environmental supports, you never suffer any trauma somehow, you have a great support system, you're healthy, emotionally supported, all of that kind of thing can actually keep at bay a lot of these things. So that's also fascinating. I mean, finding the link between those things at the time must have been like groundbreaking. And this is why so much money is pumped into into social supports of children in these critical periods. I mean, obviously, we kind of take it for granted. Like, of course, children should be treated well and fed and nurtured and things. But when you take it a step further beyond general like ethics and compassion, it's really, really, really important in terms of, more severe consequences and behavior and possible disorders down the line. Cool. Another book you're reading, Body Keeps the Score. Yeah, I've heard of that one as well. Her body stores trauma. Very interesting. Yeah, I think that's probably very complicated scientifically, but it is a very interesting, and it's again on that line of epigenetics as well. Cool. Did I miss any questions or comments in the chat? Sorry, it kind of proliferated there. Alrighty. Okay, so I suppose just before we move on to this prenatal development track and shift gears a little bit to chapter 3, yeah, are there any other questions just relating to that gene environment interaction or anything from those topics that are covered in your assignments? Just it's kind of like a checkpoint at this point because now we're moving beyond that content. Cool, good to hear, good to hear. Please don't be shy if anyone does have a question. Yeah, so I really want to urge you guys to try and bear in mind. I know it's the way that these modules are always structured is because there's so much content is very compartmentalized. Like you learn about Freud and then you learn about Bowlby and you learn about Erickson. But especially now going through this kind of early developmental period, try and like bear almost all of those approaches in mind and see how they all kind of have credence depending on how you are looking at this particular thing. Okay. So yeah, but I will try and like pick out different perspectives and shape discussion as we go along that way as well. Because you'll more than likely be asked at some point, if not now in later years, to apply, different theories to different scenarios, to different perspectives on things and explain something in terms of a developmental theory. So I want to try and just start that thinking pattern off during our sessions and then going forward while you're reading, obviously, as well. Okay, so prenatal development, pre meaning before, natal, yeah, like in utero kind of. So this is the developmental period from conception until just before birth is the prenatal period. And yeah, so we go through these 3 main stages, and it will be important for you guys to remember the names of these stages and what happens in them. So firstly, we have the germinal stage. So that is literally when cell division starts happening. Fertilization happens first, cell division, and that initial. Does anyone know what the initial cell of a baby growing organism is called? Starts with a Z. Yes, zygote. Excellent. What's the next one? Pop quiz time. The stage kind of gives it away. Embryo, yep. And then fetus. Lovely. Okay, good. So yeah, those are the names of those things. Do bear in mind like what order they appear in, that kind of thing. It'll be probably quite important at some point. Okay. Okay, so first stage is that literally initial, the first 2 weeks of pregnancy, when cell division occurs a lot, very rapidly, the zygote now forms, which is basically just a mass of cells, DNA. It's still all very jumbled. Nothing's really formed in shape yet. And then moving into the embryonic phase, which is longer, so it's between 3 and 8 weeks, roughly. This is when that kind of human, or more like a lizard shape, but human shape kind of starts to form as the embryo in this stage. And it's more importantly, this is when that initial brain development starts to happen. Okay, so again, if you guys do neuropsych at any point, you'll have to learn all of the different parts of the brain, but also just the first stage of the brain that develops are these three things. It's the forebrain. So what becomes this neocortex is like the big pink bit that we think of when you think brain. The midbrain, which starts off, large in perspective to the rest, then ends up becoming, the middle bit that runs through the middle, that gray matter there. And then the hindbrain is the beginning of that central nervous system that becomes the spine and the spinal cords and this cord, one spinal cord, and the nervous system that then obviously runs throughout the body. Yes, the heartbeat develops very early. Sometimes you can hear a heartbeat, from around 5 weeks, depending. And has anyone ever heard a baby heartbeat here? I mean, some of you, I know some of you have children. It's so much faster than you think it's going to be. It's like, so it's really actually quite fascinating. It was cool for me actually, because when I was in matric, my sister-in-law was pregnant, and we found a stethoscope, and so we could like listen to the heartbeat as it developed over time. So it was really fascinating. I'm not advocating for you going up to random pregnant women, but if someone in your life is pregnant, try and listen to the heartbeat. It's really cool. Okay, so then, most importantly, this is the phase where that brain and the base of the spinal cord and nervous system starts to form. And then from around 9 weeks until birth, so the rest until, 39 weeks, technically? So the rest of the time is that fetal period when the baby is now actually forming. It's more recognizable as the shape of a baby human and not this weird like gecko looking thing. I don't know if anyone has seen any like 4D scans in this early period. Little humans look really weird in this stage. I didn't want to scar anyone with pictures. Okay. So that's that. Those are those periods. And we'll, I guess, jump into a bit more of what happens there. Okay, so I mean, obviously important to bear in mind, like, yes, when we're talking about development, we're interested in what's happening with the baby, the embryo, the fetus developing, but also what is happening to the parent's body, the mom's body. Okay, so obviously those of you that have been pregnant before, it's not a fun time. Morning sickness, frequent urination, stress, fatigue, tender swollen breasts, metallic taste in the mouth, which is interesting. Apparently this is due to increased estrogen. Not everyone experiences that. Obviously weight gain, and then the baby bump starts to develop. Different people start showing at different times, but it's often around the 3-month mark. So around 12 weeks. Can be earlier, depends. Okay, but this should be, generally general knowledge. What we really want to get into is this kind of thing, because again, now we're speaking about this biological and environmental interaction. Okay, so what we refer to these external factors that can have a negative effect on a pregnancy are referred to as teratogens. Sorry, the top of this image seems to have gotten cut off. That's supposed to be a T. Some people say teratogens. I don't know. Tomato, doesn't matter. That's how you spell it. But that's what these harmful external factors we refer to. So this is a really important thing. A lot of this has become general knowledge, but a lot of it is honestly still quite debated around. So yeah, we can just have a little discussion around this as well. Yeah, I mean, obviously this image gives a few examples, but what do we understand harmful things to pregnancy, and why, if anyone knows, interestingly, what happens biologically? There are obviously also things that aren't on the slide that you can bring up. Okay, yes, yeah, these things can impair the development of a fetus, and I mean, could even be embryo. It depends on the thing and when it crosses that blood-brain barrier. Okay. So some things are basically, and I mean, we're doing in simple terms, it's not a biology course, but basically harmful particles like particular viruses, if they're small enough to pass through the placenta into the baby's system, then obviously they are harmful. It's like they don't just stop, because the placenta really acts as a large filter. It's one of those defense mechanisms that is built in. Okay, let me check the chat out. All right, shellfish is dangerous. Yes, a lot of people tell pregnant women to not eat shellfish. I think fish in general, a lot of people tend to stay away from. I think just of the fear around it. But yeah, because they can be parasites that can be harmful. Raw fish as well. I actually watched a horrifying documentary yesterday on food contamination in America, and it was horrific, but that's an aside anyway. But yeah, so obviously anything that is raw actually is a potential hazard because it can be contaminated with anything. But yeah, we tend to trust the food we buy, right? Yeah, so there are, and I've got another image now that will show you the different teratogens will affect the development at different times depending on which organs are developing then, what's most susceptible, that kind of thing. So for instance, I know chickenpox is obviously, it's actually very dangerous, but it depends on the trimester that you're in. I know that if the mom contracts or just is exposed to chickenpox in the first or second trimester, or German measles as well, it's more dangerous than if it's in the last trimester, and that's because most of organs and things are already developed and they're just reaching maturity. Well, not maturity, baby maturity. Before birth. Yeah, I mean, offhand, I know that chickenpox, measles can cause blindness, sometimes deafness as well, learning disabilities. It really depends on, I mean, so many factors. Yeah, there is that interesting documentary. I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember the exact name either. It might just be Babies, Rebecca. That's cool. Yeah, you guys should go check that out. Oh, thalidomide. Oh my goodness, that's horrific. Yeah. So thalidomide is one of those really awful instances in history where, and it's so that it was a prescription drug. When was this? Was it in the? I can't remember which decade this was. It was more recent than you think it was, obviously. But it was a drug that was deemed safe for pregnancy, and so women were prescribed it. Yeah, 50s, 60s, and obviously took it. But then horrific things started happening. So yeah, birth deformities. I mean, some were really bad. Sometimes it caused spontaneous abortion, miscarry. But then other times, yeah, like born without an arm, maybe without fingers, a leg, yeah, missing limbs, things like that. There were really bad consequences, and that like instance that happened in America, and that is really what led to the development of all of these drug safety laws that we have today, was because of that incident. So yeah, that's an example of how prescription drugs can harm babies. So basically, from what I understand, there's very little medication that you can take when you're pregnant. Like Panado is basically it, and that's if you absolutely have to, kind of thing. So that's horrifying as well. But yeah, again, it's because of how it can cross through the placenta and then harm the development of the baby. And then Panado can't, basically, and that's why it's safe. There are a couple of other medications. I mean, I don't, know the name for them right now. Okay, so alcohol is an obvious one. This has been proven unequivocally that alcohol harms the development of children. Depends on to different degrees. Does anyone know the disorder that can develop from heavy alcohol intake during pregnancy in the baby? Yoractan is literally, I think, what did they, it's like an X class. Like you cannot prescribe it to anyone that even might be pregnant. Like you literally, when it's prescribed to women that are of, I don't know why the words breeding age are coming to me, but like of baby bearing capacity, so have gone through puberty, you have to be up there. Doctors have to be absolutely certain that there's no chance of them falling pregnant because it literally causes an instant abortion. It will terminate pregnancies or just do horrific things. It's a very dangerous drug. But yes, Avantika, fetal alcohol syndrome. Okay, we have a very large problem of fetal alcohol syndrome in South Africa. There's actually been some recent-ish studies on this that have been very interesting neuropsychologically, based in the Western Cape. So we know that, I mean, we have substance abuse problems all over, but there's been the spotlight on the Western Cape lately, probably because that's where the money is for research. But yeah, so also that would be something that would be interesting for you guys to go and look at as a case study. Okay. Yeah, so there are different things that happen, and also this does occur on a scale, so not all cases are very severe. Like some cases of fetal alcohol syndrome just have a little bit of the physical features and no mental impairments or anything. But then on the severe end, yeah, there are physical features, yeah, generally very small. They've got the flat upper lip. What's this thing called? I can't remember right now. Generally wider set eyes, cleft, thank you. So there are those defining features, and then often mental problems, developmental disorders, learning disabilities, really any mix of cognitive issues come into it. And sometimes seizures and things as well. So at a very young age, actually, they discovered babies literally are born in withdrawal, or they go into withdrawal in the early hours of their life, and that can obviously be fatal if bad enough, because it can induce seizures and things. And particularly if the baby's born at home, or I don't know, just somewhere that there isn't a hospital around that would be able to treat them, obviously can be very bad. Okay. Radiation, I mean, that's a bit of an obvious one. Everyone has watched those things and knows what happens to people that are exposed to radiation. And then nicotine. So this one's also debated. How much is too much? I actually don't have a solid answer for you. It's just basically doctors at now obviously tell people that smoke to quit, but also there's this interesting thing that happens where, because of what nicotine does to calm anxiety, just quitting cold turkey would increase anxiety and blood pressure and actually possibly lead to some issues with the pregnancy, make it a difficult pregnancy. So doctors basically just say cut down as much as you can. Exactly. Yeah, it would cause stress. So it's a difficult situation. Smoking is always a contentious topic, though. It's always very interesting to see generationally how people like debate the idea of smoking, and I mean, especially like the younger generations now, we're born into a world where it's bad, but how does it still happen? That kind of thing. It's interesting social debate. But for another time. Yes, yeah, drugs the same. Yeah, any depending on the drug, it literally any substance that is alters your state in any way is harmful to a baby, and some are worse than others, obviously. Yeah. All right. Okay, so this complicated image, you can have a look at this later. I'll embed the slides in the page. But yeah, just to show how different external factors impact a pregnancy at different stages. So yeah, we've got this first phase, the dividing zygotes. That's when the implantation is happening. So very importantly, remember the egg travels from the ovary through the fallopian tubes. That's where it gets fertilized, and then ploops goes into the uterus and implants in the wall, and that's where the baby starts to grow. Okay, cells then divide. If the fertilized egg doesn't get implanted, it leaves, and then yeah, pregnancy doesn't occur. So that implantation is important, an important factor there. Okay, if anyone wasn't aware. Yeah, and so obviously that's a very risky time, and you're often not even really aware of it. I mean, unless you're actively trying to get pregnant, you may not be aware of this happening if it's an accident, obviously. And yeah, vulnerable time. But yeah, so then this next, the embryonic stage, because things like your central nervous system, eyes, heart, I mean, limbs are starting to develop. Even teeth start to develop in the 6th and 7th week, which is a little bit hectic to me because, I mean, babies are born without teeth, but obviously they develop jaw. Yeah, so all of those things start to develop around 6 weeks. And yeah, obviously this means that because those are in the early stages of development, they are vulnerable to external pollutants or, yeah, teratogens, that kind of thing. And yeah, can result in things, heart defects. If there's something that affects heart, it will happen in this between 3 and 8-ish weeks. Yeah, lots of different things that can happen. Actually, the point is, you don't have to go and memorize these things. It's really just to demonstrate. Sorry, got disconnected for a minute there. I'm back. Can you guys hear me now? Sorry. Okay. Alrighty. So any questions around this prenatal period? I just want to see if I. Okay, that's for the next stage though. I think we'll probably end our session off with the next discussion. Yeah. Okay, so from the prenatal stage, so that's during in the womb, we have the perinatal environment. So from the meaning of the word perinatal, does anyone know what this describes? What period is this? Yeah, so basically the process of the birth process and like immediately after. So peri means during or in the process of yeah. So yeah, literally the birthing process. So from labor to the kind of the first few hours of life is the perinatal environment, and then so very short window, and then yeah, from there on is the neonatal environment that we'll move on to. Okay, so this graph I pulled up a month or two ago. I was teaching a similar honors course and I included this. So this is very recent data. And you can go onto this website. I can't remember which one it was. It was either WHO or the UN website or stats. But yeah, so I just compared a couple of different countries and the infant mortality rates. And so this is in the context of perinatal. So this is death during birth or immediately after. Okay. Yeah, so obviously a big decline from the 70s, which is phenomenal. And generally, in most places, we're seeing a decrease. In South Africa, we are still seeing a gradual drop off now of infant mortality rates, which is good. Okay. Yeah, yeah, and this is due to many things, obviously, advancements in medicine being the first and foremost one. But, the government's obviously been trying to increase access to healthcare, quality of healthcare, all of that stuff, and has had some kind of effect. And also tied into it is the Standard Development Goals that the UN set out. I mean, it was in 2015, but they're still ongoing with the new ones. And yeah, so to eradicate infant mortality is one of those goals to hopefully achieve by 2030. Yeah. Anyway, so the world as a whole is obviously working very hard on this. And so, what can you guys notice from this graph? Like looking at the countries, maybe where they are. And yeah, what do you notice about these patterns that may be interesting in terms of the factors that affect infant mortality rates? Yeah, developed countries have a steady and generally steeper rate of decline. And I mean, they start off low as well, right? So I tried to get some interesting countries, not just comparing America and England and whatever, like usual, right? Yeah. But yeah, and there are so many of these factors. We could probably go on for it for some time. What we speak about is like sociologically now is developing countries. So what we used to refer to as like second or third world. Yeah, obviously, there's more poverty, there's less access to healthcare, there's less education, so awareness of safe practices for birth, things like that. I mean, access to medical care is obviously a huge one. Um, yeah. Um, so the midwife thing is very interesting culturally, and we should actually just chat about that for a minute. So this is a controversial topic. I've honestly been in some heated debates around this in my life, which is very interesting. Most of the time, I just try and stoke the debate. But there's this decision that many people, well, I suppose people in a position of privilege have to make when deciding where to give birth to your child. Do you do it in a hospital? Do you do it at home? How do you do it at home? Do you have a midwife? Do you what happens? And so, I mean, obviously, it's a privileged position to even have that choice, right? To have the choice of timing it and going to a lovely private hospital where very few things may go wrong, etc. Yeah, a lot of the argue. So, what is the argument? Is anyone pro home birth here? There's zero judgment. It's just so interesting, and often there's a cultural element as well. Pro home birth. Okay, interesting. Some reasoning, please, if you don't mind sharing. And then also those who may be pro hospital. Why? Pro to what makes you comfortable. Excellent hedging, Natasha. Yeah, so I think the first thing that often comes up is the risk of complications. Doctor's backup. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, interesting. So, oh, Anita, that's fascinating. So you did two each. Wow. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of you, the general thing seems to be that, the best decision is whatever's safest for mom or baby and whatever's possible at the time. And yeah, a lot of these feelings around this are often politically motivated, often culturally. I mean, some cultures just that's what you do. You give birth at home. It's a collective process. Um, the hospital thing is medicalized. It's obviously, but it's kind of sterile. It's very individualistic, very Western influence. And yeah, honestly, I am personally pro hospital. I don't know why, probably because I was raised that way as well. But just the idea of complications freak me out intensely. But also, yeah, I mean, how many things go wrong when you're in hospital anyway? And yeah, sometimes can't be saved, but is what it is. Um, what's happening here? Doctors do push for C-sections, but this is now interesting though, because especially in countries with NHIs, so like in England, you basically have to be in like fear of imminent death to either you and or the baby to be given a C-section. Otherwise, the NHI will not pay for it. You know, you'd have to then pay for it, and it's extremely expensive. Um, so that influences that as well. I know in South Africa, a lot of medical aids won't pay for it unless it is medically motivated as well, really depending on, of course, because it's a capitalist scheme, which level of the medical aid you're on, etc. Yeah, in Italy as well. Also, I think Portugal. I remember hearing that at some point. Yeah, lots and lots of places. Actually, it's literally it's only an emergent thing. It's always also a really favorite thing for all medical shows to do an episode on. You know, mom doesn't want a C-section, doesn't want a C-section. Oops, is going to die, has a C-section. You know, like that classic trope. Yeah. So look, we know. I mean, it was invented to intervene in the event of complications. So yeah, and as an emergency measure, absolutely, it's definitely something that has contributed to the decline in both infant and mother mortality rates in in this process. Um, 20th hour of labor, my God, that is a long time. Time is relative, right? Like it's the longest 2 minutes of your life waiting for the microwave to ding when you have like you're hungry. So imagine 20 hours. You're anyway. Cool. Yeah, interesting, interesting. And you can literally always go on. Yeah, there are many ways that a safe delivery can occur. There is always that element of chance, you know. You can be literally as prepared as possible. You can have an ultrasound machine to make sure that everything's fine, and the cord can slip and get tangled and wrap around the baby's neck and at the last second, and it's a complication that can occur. And yeah, education and preparedness helps with that. But again, yeah, it's that argument to even have those measures is a point of privilege. And I think it's just important in these discussions to be mindful of that. Yeah. I mean, no, I know some people have been in labor for, yeah, well over 20 hours. You hear horror stories. Yeah. There's also this thing, the thing of like, do you take the drugs? Do you have the epidural? Do you not? You know, often it's the very similar debates, very often culturally, politically, contextually infused. Um, take the drugs, always take the drugs. Yeah, I am of the opinion, but respect people's choices. If you want to be in pain, go for it. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't take though, and then that's awkward. Okay. All right. So, yeah, look, we are running out of time, but to address also just basically the end bit of this perinatal period is that immediate moment after birth. And so something to be aware of is, I don't know if any of you have heard of this before or seen it happen, is the APGAR scale. So when the baby pops out, whoever's there, doctor, nurses, whoever, midwife, whoever is trained in this, and it's a universal thing, but yeah, South Africa, we do use it. And there are just these categories called criteria that they assess literally within a minute to see the state of the baby, particularly if it was a difficult birth, things like that to see. And so the things that they measure are appearance. So literally, what does the baby look like? Like if they're blue, that's a problem. It means they're not breathing properly yet. You know, is their whole body blue or is it just the arms and legs? So then, yeah, it's to a degree. And then obviously, if they come out pink, that's excellent. Or yeah, pinkish, right? Sorry. Yeah, so pulse rates as well. So they measure the pulse very quickly. If it's very low, that's a problem, and they have to intervene. Grimace. So this is it's like that reflex thing. So like, you know, those classic 50s shows where they like smack the baby on the butt just to get it to cry. yeah, sometimes it's a little pinch or just, I mean, often what makes babies cry is just the sheer trauma of being born into the cold air. But yeah, often they'll have to just try a little stimulus, poke the foot, tickle the foot or something to get them to respond. And if there is no response, that's obviously a sign of a big problem. Activity, so yeah, are they floppy or are they moving, that kind of thing. And then obviously respiratory effort. So that's, can they see the chest moving? Are they gasping? Or is there a nice strong cry indicating that their breathing is strong and normal? Yeah, and this, or I mean, they're trained on to observe these things almost simultaneously, right? And then they rate this on a scale. 7 and above is absolutely fine. They don't have immediate concerns. They move on to the next phase. Between 4 and 6, it means there's monitoring that needs to happen with whatever, area they're worried about. But if anything is 3 or below, that's critically low, and that means immediate intervention. And yeah, so also, did you know that like they actually start resuscitation on newborns before the heart stops, if the rate is very low, because it increases the chances of them actually saving. That was just something interesting that I learned once, so I like to pass it on. Yeah, so this is that really important, like at the moment of birth. And again, so this idea, the topic we've been speaking about, this, hospital, not hospital, but also what happens if you're just stuck in traffic and then your Uber driver has to catch. That's also a classic trope for TV shows and things, but it happens. People are born in random places. And then, yeah, kind of, education is important. If you as a human are ever in this awkward instance where you have to be around someone giving birth as an emergency, these would kind of be good things to know, right? Yeah. Airplanes as well. Oh my goodness. Isn't it like dodgy to fly very late in pregnancy though, for that reason? And like they tend to discourage it. Yeah. Change in pressure can make labor occur after 34 weeks. Yeah. I think I missed a comment or two up earlier. I saw something about 40 weeks. Son was born at 40 weeks. Is that common for boys? I think it just happens. You get some babies that just take extra time. Because it is, yeah, technically it's actually, we say 9 months, but it's not. It's actually closer to 10, is the actual time. Yeah, it can happen. At the end of the day, medically, the longer they stay in, the better, because it's a safe environment, allows them to develop properly. Yeah, obviously there comes a time where they have to induce, but yeah, around 40, 41 weeks is fine. Yeah, Rebecca, fascinating. Yeah, there's like that show. I also think it's like, I don't know how people don't know they're pregnant, but this is the power of the mind, right? You just rationalize the pain into tummy ache or things. And that's, yeah, delusion, really. Yeah. Interesting. 6 months. Yo, that's late to find out. That's a surprise. Or you only have 3 months to prepare. Jeez. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Thanks, guys. I think we will end it off there. I'll pick up with neonatal going into early childhood next time. But yeah, last instance, are there any questions, concerns? Your granny was born on a tractor. Fascinating. Like literally on a tractor? Yeah, they're always interesting birth stories. And there's interesting thing like culturally, like about sharing birth stories. There's this thing that happens about like social cohesion and bonding and yeah, shared trauma and discomfort, I guess, as well, and happiness. Yeah, wild. Okay. Yeah, thanks, guys. If there aren't any other questions or anything, yeah, you are free to go. Thank you so much for coming and for engaging. I will upload this recording in the morning. Yeah, our next session is going to be the official NSS for the assignment. Okay, so I'll be breaking that down in detail and we'll discuss any questions there are around that then as well. Right, have a great evening.